LA is on fire.
Again.
But recently, Doechii at the BET Awards used her platform, and I think she won Album of the Year, so congrats to her.
She won, I know she won Female Artist of the Year.
Okay.
I think she won
hip-hop artist. I
think she won Hip-Hop Album of the Year, too. I think that's the video I saw, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Either
way, congrats.
I don't watch award shows. But yeah, she used her platform at the BET Awards to speak out against the Trump administration and its use of military force and the ICE protests, as she says, literally right outside. So let's watch this little video.
I do want to address what's happening right now outside of the building. There are ruthless attacks that are creating fear and chaos in our communities in the name of law and order. Trump is using military forces to stop a protest. And I want y'all to consider what kind of government it appears to be when every time we exercise our democratic right to protest, the military is deployed against us. What type of government is that? People are being swept up and torn from their families, and I feel it's my responsibility as an artist to use this moment to speak up for all oppressed people. For Black people, for Latino people, for trans people, for the people in Gaza. We all deserve to live in hope and not in fear. And I hope we stand together, my brothers and my sisters, against hate, and we protest against it. Thank you, BET.
Doechii.
Talk about using your platform.
Yeah, I like that, man. A handful of questions here. There's a lot that we can talk about. Obviously there's a lot going on here, but let's talk about the moment versus the movement. So is Doechii's speech, is it a singular powerful moment, or does it signify a renewed, more direct push from hip-hop artists against perceived government overreach and authoritarianism, as she kind of suggested?
Single moment.
You think so?
Yes. I want to have more hope. I really do, as far as artists and their ability to affect change. But there's so much noise to cut through, not only if you're somebody who watches the news, but if you're somebody who's consuming art. Doechii's music, I think, is thoughtful. I think there's room for her to grow, just like there is for any artist. But I feel like what she said there could find its way into her art. I just know that it's so hard for people. A lot of people, they're like, hey, I'm not a politician. I'm just an artist. And I don't begrudge a lot of those people because I don't want them to speak on things that they are not learned about.
Right.
Because there's some people who are going to find it problematic, that she said anything, because they're like, hey, those people are breaking the law, who were sweeping up in these ICE raids. There's going to be people who come for that. And then there's going to be people
civil offense
who are upset that she mentioned the trans movement, and then of course, if there was anything particularly brave, it was saying anything about Gaza, because I don't think anybody in entertainment is inclined to say anything about what's going on there.
True.
So I don't think there's enough of an influence, because I don't think, honestly, capitalism will tell you, like, hey, it's best if you keep your mouth shut. That's good for Doechii, but what's good for Doechii is not good for me, struggling artist who does not have an award, who does not have a Grammy, and who does not have a #1 album.
I think Jay's right with the moment. And kudos to her for having the wherewithal and the guts to say it, because a lot of people are being we're in a censorship era where you can't say certain things, and for her to step up there at this platform and do it, as Birdman would say, I respect it. I'm curious to see if there would be, I guess, any ramifications for her professionally post this comment. What comes from this? What does how does the fan base react? How is she perceived?
Because her fan base is gonna love it.
No, that's actually a good point. Yeah, her fan base is gonna rock with it regardless. You're right, but we know how this goes. Sometimes when somebody jumps out the window per se and says something that's not deemed correct, there's usually ramifications for that. So I'm very curious to see on a professional level outside of her core, if any of that changes a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of just agree with you guys' points for the most part. I don't see this creating a big movement or people falling in line in order to kind of rage against the machine, because everybody's thing now is to pretty much fall in place anyway.
Yeah,
there is no raging against the machine. Is you're solidifying your allegiance with political parties now, and people just you know what I'm saying, subscribe to that. Whatever they say goes as a whole. And if you have friends on both sides or even you look online, whatever this person subscribes to politically, that's the only thing that they agree with. And I've seen it on both sides, even with this happening, even with the riots or protests going on in LA. They'll be like, well, what about this or what about that? That's why I don't see this being a big movement for anybody. It's just a moment. It's something that she did. We've seen stars do this plenty of times, and it doesn't lead to anything that actually helps aid or support what's actually going on. So,
yeah, that second part. I mean, I think it's a great statement.
Yeah.
But that's really kind of all that it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, shouts to all the people that are actually there and are actually protesting ICE and are actually putting bodies on the line, if you will. You know, some of the optics about all that stuff is kind of messed up. You knew the fact that they're flying Mexican flags. You knew that was going to be a contentious point for conservatives to be like, oh, we'll go back to culture and is different than, you know, these other things, you know. So, but yeah, I kind of agree with you there. A lot of people will say that music is just for fun, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Kind of goes into what we're kind of alluding to in a way. But hip hop music has influenced and has a long history of social justice issues, talking about them, addressing them. Jay, you kind of already mentioned this. I know we've talked about that, but I know we don't necessarily expect it from artists, but is there a responsibility from certain artists and artistry in general to put a voice behind some of these movements?
Only if you're prepared to do it. You know, I just don't think, you know, when Chuck D is, let me rephrase that,
yeah.
is, you could take Chuck D away from the microphone on the stage and ask him about what's going on in different parts of the world, in different parts of this country, and you'd be able to have a well thought out, nuanced conversation about it. I don't know if there is a situation right now. Maybe there are some artists that do have that wherewithal to do so, but we don't talk to them particularly often. Maybe there's going to be some people who want to talk to Doechii now about this. I hope if they do, she's prepared to have the conversation. I'm not expecting her to, because once again, I feel like this was something very much of the moment. Like the protests were going on outside of the building where they were having this award show. Right. I'm surprised it wasn't moved or canceled or something, like, because these are the type of things that can shut down an entire city. So it's just so hard now to expect anything, particularly from hip hop artists. I'm not, you know, when I see who we have out here and who's listened to and who has a voice, you know, I'm glad. Look, I saw the part where they awarded the best female hip hop artist, and I'm glad Doechii was there to say something, because I don't think any other people who were nominated, maybe I take that back because Rhapsody was nominated, but everyone else, I was like, no, it was just going to be like, hey, thank my whoever publicist and my record company and new single coming out on the 19th. You know, that's all we were going to get. And honestly, that's all a lot of them are prepared to do. So once again, having nuanced conversations about complex issues, I've said it before, a lot of people are not able to answer the follow-up question. And the thing is, I'm not expecting that from artists, because a lot of times we don't get that from the political pundits who are on quote unquote news stations.
Sure. So
I can't really be upset at an artist who doesn't have the ability to answer a follow-up question about the protest, about ICE, about Gaza, you know, even about, you know, someone's sexual identity, because that can be complicated if you haven't done the work or the research.
It's about the messenger. The bar is so, in my personal opinion, the bar is so low. I don't have expectations as it relates to rappers. I'm just being honest. I don't see anybody out there where I'm like, yeah, man, I sure hope they ask him or ask her about XYZ, because I know they'll be able to articulate themselves and follow-up questions, be able to handle those. I don't see that.
Do you think, before you jump in, Terry, do you think that, do you want that? Like, do we want people, do we want voices in these spaces that can speak on that? Like, look, Vic Mensa's he's not huge. Vic Mensa talks about this stuff on a regular basis. You know, Locksmith.
D1, we talked about
D1,
it earlier.
There's lots of artists that do, but do we want Is that something that we want?
I think if it's done when Jay used Public Enemy as an example, I think that's dope because Chuck, I know to his point, Chuck is valid with what he's talking about. Even with, you could take Ice Cube for an example. Ice Cube, you can have a conversation with him about certain things and know that it's going to be legitimate. He's not going to be thrown off by questions. We've seen him have those types of conversations. He's also older. To my other point about the crop not being that good.
But even when Ice Cube was younger,
yeah,
that's the thing. Like, there was a time when knowledge really was pushed in hip hop.
There you go.
Okay, sometimes the people were wrong, but at least they had an answer.
Yep.
So you would have these, panels and symposiums, if you will, that would have KRS-One and Ice Cube and Ice-T, and shout to Wise Intelligent from the Poor Righteous Teachers. You'd see him. I'm just saying that, like, if you just grab 5 rappers now who are popular, I don't trust that they'd have anything particularly useful to say.
Yeah,
and
they're not going to be on Teen Summit.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing you would, if there was still a Teen Summit, I would never invite any rappers on.
Yeah.
Nah.
Outside of speeches, what is the role, responsibility of artists like Doechii to bring structural, crucial attention to issues that might otherwise be underreported or misunderstood by mainstream media? Is there a role and a responsibility for artists to do that? I know it's similar to the previous question, but
I mean, I don't like to put the responsibility on an artist unless their heart is really in it. I don't think there's no reason to do it just to do it to get some peas and go on about your day and say, hey, I made a stance, and
then you're
then
you're like a Nancy Pelosi
exactly.
Kneeling on the X
with the kente cloth.
Come on, man.
I think that's unnecessary. But again, I don't like the message to stop at what an artist said, and that's what happens when a lot of people consume this. They hear whatever the artist said, and that's all the education they do for themselves. They don't know anything else other than what happened because of what she said.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? And I mean, somebody brought up, it's literally going on outside of these awards.
That's what she said.
If this was as polarizing or affecting these artists as such, they would have not been in this award show.
Exactly.
There we go.
Exactly.
There we go.
They would have been out on the street, helping the people that are protesting, because of what's going on. So that's why it's kind of smoke and mirrors a lot of times. I'm going to use my platform to say something, but I'm not actually going to do something.
Do you think that that's, and this could go to anybody, but do you think that there's a place for that though? Like, is there a place for people that maybe can't physically do specific, like I can't physically protest, right? If that's the thing, right? But I can be a voice and an amplifier.
Yes.
What is the trade-off there? You know what I mean? Like,
well, I think especially when everything jumped off in 2020, Jay-Z and Beyonce were bailing protesters out of jail. They couldn't be out there on the streets with them.
Yeah.
But they were still part of the movement, if you will. Yeah. And they drew a line in the sand. And that's why a lot of people, especially on that country music side, don't like Beyonce.
No, they don't. They don't like her either. They don't like Doechii. The people that don't like or not going to agree with what she said already don't like her.
Yeah.
That's why it doesn't really matter as far as when it comes to losing fans or things of that nature.
Yeah. So, because there are ways where sometimes a celebrity's attention is all you need. It might be because it might be, if you bring attention to something that affects a lot of people, it might affect you personally. Like let's just say if I became super famous and I decided I wanted to bring a particular level of attention to Alzheimer's disease, is that helping a lot of people? But it's also because it's affected me and my family, to a point where we're going through this way too much. It's just something that's in our family that affects people. But if I am as famous as Jay-Z and I can start fundraising and bringing attention to it, and maybe somewhere in that fundraising there's a cure, at least a treatment, even if I started off because it affects my family, then it helps so many other people. So sometimes we can't question people's motivation for trying to do things. We just have to look at the overall effect.
Yeah, there's not going to be a whole lot of what's his name? Wilbert Brumfley. What's his name? Wilbert.
Oh no, you talking about diabetes?
Hubert Cumberdale.
Yeah, that guy.
Wilford Brimley.
Wilford Brimley. That's his name. Yeah, I don't. People ain't as open about exposing, or not even just exposing, but you know what I'm saying, creating situations and awareness for things, because it's all about the metric, the visual metric of this artist. They live in that. They don't care nothing about being a philanthropist in that, you know what I'm saying, in that realm. Yeah. But that would be awesome if they did. And to your point about Jay-Z and Beyonce, what they're doing, that is definitely put a red dot on their back.
Yeah.
Because if you're not doing something that one side agrees with politically, they automatically demonize you for everything that you do. It doesn't matter if you're doing anything right. They're going to find something that's wrong with it. And that's on both sides. You know, it's not just one sided, but there's certain people that grab on it a whole lot more than one. But yeah.
You know, and I'm just glad, you know, at least I didn't hear anything about this where everybody else who got up and was like, I want to say something about the protest too. It was like, because they thought they saw Doechii get a whole bunch of applause. Yeah. It's like, let's not be bandwagon about things like this, especially if you, it seemed like, I don't know, because when you almost see her with the statement that she made, there was almost a little bit of a nervousness until she got into the flow of it.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes it does take a level of bravery because, hey, at the end of the day, she's still just getting started.
She is.
You know, and for you to say anything about the things that you talked about, maybe outside of the transgender thing, because a lot of times people just don't want to mess with that one way or the other. When you take a stand or a side, when you pick a side early in your career, this could affect, you know, her placements. You know, I already hear her music in commercials and things, and they're going to be somebody who say, nah, maybe this time let's not use Doechii.
That's a fair point.
You know, and so like I will, even if she's not willing to answer the follow-up questions just yet, I will, I do commend her on her bravery.
Yeah, I mean, Kanye, it didn't really affect Kanye until he affected himself, essentially. I mean, when he took his stance, or whatever you want to call it, but he also flipped. He went heel on this whole situation that he had pretty much created at one point in time. But he wasn't overly political either, though.
Well, I do remember.
That takes away what we talked about with Terry's point. Once you do that, then there goes your authenticity. Everything is out the window. I don't believe you. I can't believe anything that you say.
But even after, and like I said, this is something, sometimes these things get swept under the rug. I remember when Kanye said the thing about George W. Bush after Katrina.
That's what I was talking about specifically.
Yeah, because, you know, it was maybe a week after he was on that, I want to say Newsweek or Time, the smartest rapper in America. He was never on any of those covers again. You know, he had an endorsement with Pepsi, and we didn't see much of that.
True.
And I just remember he performed at the NFL kickoff. There's some booze in that audience. I remember these things, and I'm just saying, with what she said, there's going to be some people who were fans or maybe on the fence or were willing to get behind her on something on a financial level who are going to make different decisions now because of her statement. That's where the bravery comes into play.
Yeah,
Facts.
Because she could have just said, I want to thank Top Dog and all my fans, new single, and check out my video, and it could have been the end of it and walked off stage just like everybody else probably did that night.